As the Resolute drifted in the vastness of space, Captain Evelyn Shaw stood on the command bridge, her eyes fixed on the holographic map that displayed the movements of the Overlord fleet. The hum of the engines beneath her feet was the only sound that kept the silence at bay. Her crew, tense but determined, worked in unison, preparing the ship for what could very well be a one-way mission. "All systems are operational, Captain," said Lieutenant Clark, his voice steady despite the situation. "Cloaking device is online. Weapons primed. We're ready to engage." Shaw nodded, her face unreadable. She'd been in countless battles before, but this felt different. The Overlords weren't just another enemy. They were a nightmare given form, an empire that had crushed civilizations for millennia. And now, for the first time, humanity had something to say about it. "Prepare to move," Shaw ordered, her voice cutting through the tension like a knife. "We're going in." The plan was simple but risky. A small Overlord supply depot, located on the outskirts of their territory, was a critical point for the Overlord invasion. Without it, their forces would be delayed, forcing them to regroup and reassess. The Resolute would infiltrate the heavily guarded system, strike fast, and leave before the Overlords could retaliate. It was a gamble, but Shaw was known for her unconventional tactics, and with the Resolute at her command, she had a weapon unlike any the galaxy had seen. The ship's cloaking system shimmered into effect as they neared the system's edge, blending seamlessly with the surrounding darkness. The Resolute moved like a shadow, nearly invisible, as they approached the Overlord station, a large, heavily fortified structure orbiting a dying star. "Visual on target," Lieutenant Clark said, his voice laced with urgency. "They haven't detected us yet. Should we proceed with the strike?" Shaw's grip tightened around the armrest of her chair. This was the moment. If they hesitated, the Overlords would surely notice their presence. "Full speed ahead. Get us into firing range." The Resolute surged forward, its sleek hull cutting through space as the station loomed ahead. Shaw studied the holographic display, calculating the exact distance and timing for the strike. Every move mattered, and even a second's delay could mean disaster. As they drew closer to the depot, Shaw could almost feel the weight of the Overlord fleet closing in. Their sensors would be scanning for anything out of the ordinary, but that was the gamble. With the Resolute's advanced technology, they could slip past the fleet undetected, if they were quick enough. "Captain, the Overlord fleet is on the move," Commander Jansen said, his tone sharp. "We have about 5 minutes before they reach the station." Shaw nodded. "We'll be gone long before they get here. Target the depot's main reactor. I want it to go up in flames." The Resolute's weapon systems hummed to life, and Shaw felt the familiar weight of anticipation in her chest. The plan was as close to flawless as it could get. As soon as they struck, they would retreat, using the ship's advanced cloak to vanish into the stars before the Overlords even realized what had happened. "Ready to fire, Captain," Clark said. Shaw took a breath, locking eyes with her crew. "On my mark. 3, 2, 1, fire." The ship's weapons unleashed a series of devastating blasts, pinpointing the depot's main reactor with surgical precision. The station erupted in a violent flash of light, the explosion sending shockwaves through space. The Resolute immediately began to pull away, accelerating as the Overlord fleet scrambled to respond. "Move us out," Shaw commanded, her voice unwavering. "Get us out of here." The Resolute shot forward, cloaking device flickering back into place as the explosion's glow faded into the distance. Shaw didn't look back. There was no time to savor the victory. They had struck the Overlords, but this was only the beginning. "Captain, the Overlords are reporting the destruction of the depot," Lieutenant Clark said, his voice laced with disbelief. They didn't even detect us." Shaw's lips curled into a grim smile. "That's the advantage of being underestimated. We've just given them something to think about." But as the Resolute sped away from the explosion, Shaw couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the first chapter in a much larger war. And if the overlords thought humanity was a mere nuisance, they were about to learn a painful lesson. The galaxy had just gotten a whole lot more dangerous. The Resolute cruised through the silence of space, the mission complete, but the sense of victory was short-lived. Captain Shaw stood on the bridge, her eyes fixed on the stars outside the viewing window. The adrenaline from the successful strike still buzzed in her veins, but there was no time to celebrate. The overlords would respond, and the next move would be crucial. "We've made our mark, Captain," Commander Jansen said, his voice laced with both pride and concern. "But we know they'll come after us now. The question is, how soon?" Shaw didn't answer immediately. She had expected the overlords to retaliate, perhaps even more fiercely than before. Yet the success of their mission hadn't just been about inflicting damage. It had been about sending a message. Humanity was no longer just a prey species. They had teeth, and those teeth had sunk into the overlord's empire. A chime sounded, pulling Shaw's attention to the communication console. Lieutenant Clark's fingers danced across the controls. "Captain, we're receiving transmissions from the Federation. It seems the news of our strike is spreading." Shaw nodded. "Put it through." The screen flickered, and an image of Federation President Lyle appeared, his expression serious. "Captain Shaw, your strike has set the galaxy on fire. The overlords are furious, and reports of uprisings are flooding in from all corners of the galaxy. The oppressed races are rallying. Your actions are causing waves." Shaw's mind raced. "President Lyle, we expected this. But are we ready to handle it? We don't have the resources to defend an entire galaxy." Lyle paused, clearly considering the implications. "It's not just about defending. It's about leading. Humanity's attack on the overlords has ignited something: hope. These rebellions are not isolated anymore. They're coordinated. You're not fighting alone." The weight of those words settled over Shaw like a heavy mantle. Humanity had opened a door, and now it seemed that many races, long subjugated by the overlords, were stepping through. But with this newfound alliance came new responsibilities. "We can't leave them to fight alone," Shaw said, determination hardening her voice. "I'll begin reaching out to the resistance cells. We need to organize this. Fast. They're counting on us." "Understood, Captain," President Lyle responded. "The Federation will provide support where we can. But be cautious. This rebellion will make the overlords even more dangerous." Shaw acknowledged the warning with a sharp nod. She knew full well the overlords weren't going to let their empire fall without a fight. She could already feel the storm brewing, and it wasn't going to be easy. As the transmission ended, Shaw turned to face her crew. The bridge had a sense of quiet anticipation, the crew sensing the gravity of what was to come. "Everyone, listen up," Shaw said, her voice commanding but tinged with the weight of responsibility. "We've just ignited a fire in the galaxy. The overlords will respond, and they won't be kind. We need to be ready. This is no longer just a mission. It's a revolution." Her words hung in the air as the crew absorbed the reality of the situation. The fight had escalated from a covert strike to an all-out war for the galaxy's future. "Coordinate with our allies," Shaw continued. "We need to support these rebellions, but we also need to prepare for a counteroffensive. The overlords won't sit idly by. We're about to find out just how far they're willing to go to maintain their rule." As the crew worked feverishly to implement Shaw's orders, Lieutenant Clark spoke up, breaking the tense silence. "Captain, I'm tracking movements in the Overlord fleet. They're on the move. It looks like they're sending reinforcements to the sectors we hit. They've got their sights on us." Shaw's eyes narrowed. "I expected nothing less. Let's show them what it means to mess with humanity." The Resolute shifted course, engines roaring to life as the crew prepared for the next phase. Shaw didn't know what would come next, but one thing was certain: humanity had struck a blow for freedom, and there was no turning back now. The war had officially begun. News of humanity's strike on the Overlord's supply depot spread like wildfire, sparking uprisings across the galaxy. As the overlords retaliated with brutal force, Shaw's mind raced. The galaxy was fractured, and while the rebellions were growing, they lacked coordination, strategy, and resources. They needed to be unified, but they also needed a powerful symbol to rally behind. Someone who could bind the diverse species into a cohesive force. Shaw was that symbol, whether she liked it or not. Inside the Resolute's briefing room, Shaw sat surrounded by her most trusted officers, Commander Jansen, Lieutenant Clark, and a few other senior officers. They were deep in planning, poring over intel gathered from the resistance groups. "We've made a lot of noise, but now we need to strike where it hurts," Shaw said, her voice cold and measured. "The overlords are strong, but their strength lies in their ability to coordinate. If we take out their communications hub, we can cripple their entire network." "Captain," Jansen said, a note of concern in his voice. "The Overlord hub is heavily guarded. It's located on their homeworld, the center of their empire. It's well beyond the reach of any rebel force. Getting there and getting out would be impossible without drawing the full force of the Overlord fleet." Shaw didn't flinch. "We've never done the easy thing, have we?" She studied the holographic map of the Overlord territory, her mind running through calculations, scenarios, and risks. "I didn't come this far to back down now. We don't need to strike with numbers, Jansen. We need precision, stealth, and speed." Clark, ever the optimist, spoke up, "And we have the perfect tool for that. Resolute." His hands hovered over the controls, bringing up a schematics display of the ship's stealth capabilities. "We've been testing the new cloaking systems for months. With a precise strike, we could infiltrate their defense grid undetected. The trick will be getting to the heart of their network, disrupting their ability to coordinate the war effort before they can respond." Shaw nodded thoughtfully, looking at the team assembled before her. "We'll need a small crew, a special team, a covert mission. If we do this right, we can cripple their operations without ever being detected. But it will require absolute precision. One mistake, and the Resolute will be a target, and our entire mission will fall apart." "Understood, Captain," Clark replied. "I'll coordinate with the crew and get the team ready for the mission." A heavy silence settled in the room as Shaw considered the weight of what she was about to ask of her crew. This mission was a gamble, and its failure could mean the end of humanity's brief spark of defiance. But Shaw was no stranger to risk. The galaxy needed something more than a series of victories. It needed a game-changer, something that would send a clear message to the overlords. Humanity would not be crushed. "All right," Shaw finally said, breaking the silence. "Clark, you'll lead the team. Get them ready. I want them to infiltrate the Overlord network and destroy the communications hub. We're doing this now, before they can fortify their defenses." The team sprang into action, setting preparations into motion. Shaw stood up, her gaze piercing the stars outside the viewport. The mission was dangerous, perhaps even suicidal, but it was humanity's only chance to level the playing field. If they succeeded, it could give the galaxy the edge it so desperately needed. But if they failed, everything humanity had worked for would be lost. "I'll be with you in spirit, Clark," Shaw said, turning to her officer. "Make it count." Clark nodded, determination in his eyes. "We will, Captain. We'll make sure they hear us." As the Resolute drifted toward the edge of Overlord space, Shaw couldn't help but feel the weight of the decisions ahead. She had made her choice. Now, all she could do was pray that her team was ready to make it count. The galaxy's future depended on this one crucial moment. The mission to cripple the Overlord communications hub was underway. Shaw's pulse raced as the Resolute hurtled through space, closing the distance to the heart of the Overlord Empire. The quiet hum of the ship's engines was the only sound, but beneath the surface, Shaw could feel the growing tension in her crew. This mission was more than just a strike. It was humanity's gamble for survival. "Captain, we've reached the outer rim of Overlord space," Lieutenant Clark reported from the navigation console. "We're on schedule for the infiltration. Estimated time to the target, 12 minutes. Shaw nodded, her hands clasped behind her back. She didn't show it, but the weight of the situation was bearing down on her. The Overlords weren't a species to be underestimated, and though humanity had managed a few victories, this mission carried the risk of total annihilation. She trusted Clark and the team, but no one could predict how the Overlords would respond. The galaxy was about to find out. "Prepare the cloaking systems," Shaw ordered. "We don't need any surprises." "We're ready, Captain," Clark said, his voice tight with anticipation. "Activating cloaking now." The ship's systems hummed to life as the Resolute vanished from visible space. To any outside observer, they were nothing more than a shadow moving silently through the black void. Shaw watched the navigation screen as they drew closer to the Overlord's heavily defended communications hub. Its defenses were formidable, a vast network of ships, automated turrets, and planetary defense systems, all aimed at keeping their empire's operations intact. If the Resolute was detected even a moment too early, the entire mission would collapse. "We're almost in position," Clark reported, his fingers flying over the console. "The Overlord fleet is still unaware of our presence, but I'm detecting some strange fluctuations in their defense grid. It's almost like they know something's coming." "Can we outmaneuver them?" Shaw asked, her gaze focused on the readings. "Maybe. But we'll have to move quickly once we strike. The moment we reveal ourselves, all hell will break loose." Shaw's mind raced as she considered their options. "We strike. We get in and out, no hesitation. We don't let them get a chance to react. We don't have time for a prolonged battle." Before anyone could respond, the alarms blared. A deep, guttural voice echoed across the intercom, sending a cold chill through the bridge. "All ships, prepare for incoming attack. The Overlords have detected us." Shaw's blood ran cold. They had been discovered. Her instincts kicked in. "Activate evasive maneuvers, Clark. Cloak the ship, now." The Resolute jolted as it swerved sharply to avoid enemy fire, the ship's shields flaring as blasts rang out. The Overlords had somehow detected their presence, and the massive defense grid around the communications hub was already targeting them. Shaw felt the weight of the moment. The whole galaxy seemed to be holding its breath. "We're too close to the target," Jansen warned, his voice low. "We can't pull out now, Captain. The hub is just ahead." "Then we take it down, no matter what," Shaw said, her voice unwavering. "Clark, get us into position. We're hitting that hub, or we die trying." The tension in the air thickened as the Resolute sped toward its target, flanked by the darkened void of space and the looming threat of the Overlord defenses. As they neared, the communications hub's powerful energy shields flickered to life, crackling with intensity. The Overlords were mobilizing their entire fleet to repel the attack. "Target locked," Clark said. "Activating weapons." The moment of truth had arrived. Shaw's heart pounded in her chest, but her face remained impassive. "Fire." The Resolute's weapons discharged in a surge of blinding light. The first strike hit the energy shields, causing a violent ripple of disruption across the space station's surface. Shaw's breath caught as the Overlord shields flickered, momentarily weakened. They had only a few seconds before the full counteroffensive came. "One more shot," Shaw commanded, her eyes never leaving the battle unfolding before them. Another barrage of fire slammed into the station's weak spot. The energy shields shattered, sending a cascade of sparks and debris spiraling into space. For a moment, the entire communications hub seemed to hold its breath. Then, with a massive explosion, it detonated in a brilliant burst of light, sending shockwaves rippling outward. "We've done it," Jansen said, a tone of disbelief in his voice. "The hub's gone." Shaw let out a slow breath, but there was no time to savor the victory. The Overlords were not so easily defeated. "Pull back," Shaw ordered immediately. "Clark, take us out of here now." But it was too late. The Overlord fleet, now fully alerted to their presence, descended on the Resolute in a furious wave. Shaw's eyes narrowed. The next phase of this war had begun. The Resolute surged through space, its engines straining as the crew fought to outrun the vengeful Overlord fleet. The shockwave of the explosion from the communications hub still lingered in the vacuum of space, but the true cost of their success was unfolding quickly. The Overlords had been crippled, temporarily, but they weren't about to let humanity escape unscathed. Incoming fire, Lieutenant Clark shouted, his voice rising above the chaos. They're targeting us with full force. Shaw gripped the edge of her command chair, her knuckles turning white. The Resolute had made its strike, but now the full might of the Overlord fleet was descending on them. Their ships, vast and imposing, filled the sensors with blips, a menacing presence that dwarfed the human ship. Shields holding at 70%, Jansen reported, his voice calm despite the urgency. We're holding, but not for long. Keep evasive. Shaw barked. We can't afford to take another hit like that. The Resolute dipped and swerved through the void of space, narrowly dodging blasts that streaked past them like deadly meteors. The massive Overlord warships were relentless, their weapons slamming into the ship's shields with terrifying force. Shaw felt the weight of each hit as the Resolute trembled under the barrage. Damage to port side. Lieutenant Clark shouted, hull integrity at 80%. We've got breaches in the outer layers. Shaw's mind raced. They were fast, but not fast enough. They couldn't outrun this overwhelming force forever. They needed a plan, a way to even the odds. Jansen, do we have any way to shake them off? Shaw asked, her voice cool but tight with tension. We could use the gravity wells of the nearby asteroid field, Jansen suggested quickly. It'll scramble their sensors and make it difficult for them to track us. But it's a tight squeeze, Captain. The field's unstable. Shaw's eyes flicked to the holographic map. The asteroid field was a treacherous, unpredictable hazard, but it was their only chance. If they didn't make it through, the Resolute would be torn apart. Clark, set a course for the asteroid field. Jansen, I want you to do whatever it takes to make it out of there. No second chances. Aye, Captain, Clark responded, his voice sharp with determination. The Resolute veered hard to starboard, diving toward the asteroid field at full speed. The sound of the ship's engines thrummed louder in the bridge as they plummeted into the chaotic tangle of massive rocks and debris. The Overlord fleet followed, relentless in its pursuit, but the asteroid field threw off their sensors, causing a brief delay in their targeting. Hold on. Clark warned as they narrowly avoided a massive asteroid, its surface skimming against the Resolute's shields. The ship shuddered violently as they barreled through the field, their path lit by the explosions of stray asteroids colliding with enemy fire. Shaw's grip tightened, but she remained calm. This was it, the moment of truth. Shields are holding, Jansen yelled, a note of optimism in his voice. We've lost some external plating, but we're still intact. Clark wove the Resolute through the debris at breakneck speed, the ship's advanced navigation systems guiding them between the floating rocks and through narrow gaps. It was a gamble, but it was their best shot. The Overlord fleet was slower, less agile in the asteroid field, and the rocks acted as a natural shield, scattering incoming fire. How long can we keep this up? Shaw asked, her voice steady despite the adrenaline surging through her veins. We've got maybe 5 minutes before the fleet closes in again, Jansen replied. After that, it's game over. Shaw's eyes narrowed as she calculated their next move. The asteroid field was buying them time, but they couldn't keep running forever. They had to turn the tables on the Overlords. Now. Clark, Shaw said, her voice sharp, prepare a jump to the edge of the sector. We're going to outsmart them. Clark looked at her with a mix of disbelief and understanding. Are you suggesting a jump in the middle of all this? Exactly, Shaw replied, her eyes hard. They think they've got us cornered. But they're not accounting for the Resolute's jump drive. We'll use the field's interference to mask our position, then jump out the moment they lose us. Clark's lips tightened. It's risky. Risky is the only way we're going to survive this. The overlords were closing in fast. Shaw had no more time to hesitate. Activate jump drive on my mark, Shaw ordered. Clark, get us out of here. Now. 3, 2, 1. Clark's fingers flew over the controls, his face a mask of concentration. Mark. The Resolute surged forward, the jump drive thrumming with power as the ship tore through the asteroid field at breakneck speed. In a flash of light, the ship vanished, leaving the Overlord fleet behind, dumbfounded and disoriented. For a brief moment, the Resolute was lost in the vastness of space, but Sean knew that they had survived, at least for now. But as the ship drifted into the void, a new sense of urgency swept over her. The Overlords wouldn't stop. They couldn't. We're not safe yet, Shaw muttered, her gaze hard as she stared into the darkness of space. Not by a long shot. The Resolute drifted in the silent blackness of space, its cloaking systems still engaged as it lingered just beyond the reach of the Overlord fleet. The ship had escaped, but not without damage. The crew had done their part, but now, as Shaw stood on the bridge, she knew the consequences of their success were just beginning to unfold. Status report, Shaw ordered, her voice cutting through the tense silence. Shields are down to 40%, Jansen said, his tone grim as he stared at the flickering redouts. Hull integrity has been compromised. We've lost several systems, including the secondary engine coil. It'll take at least 20 hours to get it fully operational again. That's not good enough, Shaw muttered under her breath, though she knew they had no choice. They had to rest and repair before they could move again, but even that brief pause was a risk. The Overlords would be hunting for them, and every moment they spent in hiding brought the fleet closer. Lieutenant Clark's voice cut through her thoughts. Captain, I've been monitoring the Overlord communications. They're furious, but more importantly, they're organizing. We've set them back, but we've also made them more dangerous. They've pulled their fleets together into a massive offensive formation, one we haven't seen before. It's like they're preparing for something bigger. Shaw's brow furrowed. The Overlords were ruthless, and this new formation could only mean one thing. They were coming for humanity with everything they had. How long do we have before they're on our tail again? Shaw asked. Not long, Clark replied. They've already begun scanning the surrounding sectors for us. We need to make repairs quickly, or we're dead in the water. Shaw's mind raced as she processed the situation. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and running out of time. But they still had one advantage: the rebellion that had been sparked across the galaxy. The allies they had made would be their best chance at surviving the coming storm. Jansen, Clark, start working on repairs. We'll need every bit of firepower we can muster. I want us ready to move in 12 hours, and that means we need to stay ahead of the Overlords at all costs. Aye, Captain, Jansen said, his voice steady despite the severity of their circumstances. Clark, contact the Federation and the resistance groups. We need to form a new strategy, one that focuses on coordinating our efforts. This fight is bigger than just us now. Understood, Clark replied. I'll get the communications channels open. Shaw turned toward the viewport, staring out into the endless void of space. The Resolute was a small ship in the grand scheme of things, a single spark in a galaxy teeming with enemies. But she couldn't shake the feeling that something far greater was at stake. This was no longer just a fight for survival. This was the beginning of a new era. Humanity had been underestimated for too long, but now, with each battle they fought, and each victory they claimed, they were changing the course of the galaxy. Captain, Jansen said, breaking her thoughts. The repairs are underway, but we'll need resources. We can't stay here for long. I know, Shaw replied, her voice sharp. Clark, patch me through to President Lyle. Clark worked quickly, his hands flying over the console as the connection was established. The image of President Lyle appeared on the screen, his face serious but resolute. Captain Shaw, "It's good to see you're still alive," Lyle said, a hint of relief in his voice. "I've been hearing the reports. That strike on the communications hub was audacious, nothing short of a miracle. But I'm not going to lie to you, Captain. We're in the eye of the storm now." "I know, Mr. President," Shaw replied, her gaze unwavering. "The overlords won't give up easily, but we've done something they didn't expect. We've rallied the galaxy. The rebellions are growing. We need to keep that momentum going, or everything we fought for will be lost." Lyle nodded, his expression grim. "The Federation is doing everything it can to support you, but we need to act quickly. The overlords have reassembled their forces, and we've confirmed they're targeting key systems we can't afford to lose. Your mission has shaken them, Captain, but the war is far from over. We need you to strike again, not just at the overlords, but at their infrastructure. We need to cripple their ability to retaliate." Shaw's eyes narrowed, her thoughts racing. The Federation was right. The overlords had to be struck where it hurt the most, at the core of their empire. "I'll get to work on it," Shaw said, determination hardening her voice. "We'll need supplies and allies. I'll send out the call to the resistance networks and focus on gathering intel on their key systems. The next strike will be decisive." Lyle's expression softened slightly. "Captain, remember, you're not alone in this. The Federation and our allies will stand with you. You've already done the impossible once. We all believe in you." Shaw's lips curled into a grim smile. "We'll make it count, President. This isn't over." As the transmission ended, Shaw turned to face her crew. The Resolute may have been battered and bruised, but it wasn't finished yet. She could feel the storm on the horizon. The overlords were coming, but they had a plan now. They had a purpose, and together, humanity would fight for the future of the galaxy. "All right," Shaw said, her voice steady. "Let's get to work." The Resolute had limped into a hidden sector at the edge of the galaxy, far from the prying eyes of the overlords. The repairs were proceeding slowly, and the crew had little time to rest. Every passing hour brought the overlords closer to their doorstep, their retaliatory forces assembling into an overwhelming fleet. Shaw knew that the clock was ticking. The next strike had to be decisive, or humanity's chances of survival would dwindle with every day they spent in hiding. Shaw paced the command deck, her mind filled with plans and contingencies. Despite the support from the Federation and the growing rebellion across the galaxy, she couldn't shake the feeling of isolation. Every decision she made carried the weight of not just the crew's lives, but the fate of entire worlds. The pressure was suffocating, but there was no room for doubt. The overlords had to be defeated, and humanity had to be the one to do it. "Captain," Jansen's voice broke through her thoughts. "The repairs are almost done, but there's something else we need to discuss." Shaw turned, her eyes sharp. "What is it?" Jansen hesitated for a moment, then handed her a datapad. "It's about the Overlord's fleet. We've intercepted a transmission indicating they're assembling a massive force near the planet Xeris, one of their key strongholds. If they manage to secure it, they'll be able to launch an all-out assault on the Federation. We can't let that happen." Shaw's mind immediately began to work through the possibilities. Xeris was a major strategic location. If the overlords took control of it, they would have a clear path to wipe out the Federation's defenses. Losing Xeris would shift the balance of power in their favor, potentially bringing an end to the war before it had truly begun. "We need to stop them," Shaw said, her voice grim. "But we don't have the firepower to take them head-on. Not yet. We need to weaken their defenses, disrupt their supply lines, and create a diversion to buy us some time." "Exactly," Jansen replied. "And we got one advantage we can use. Xeris has a series of heavily defended mining colonies on its moons. If we can hit those colonies, we can cripple their resources. Without those mining operations, the overlords will struggle to maintain their war machines." Shaw considered it for a moment. It was risky, but it was their best chance to level the playing field. Striking at Xeris would send a clear message to the Overlords and buy them the time they needed to regroup and prepare for a more decisive blow. Clark. Shaw turned to her second-in-command. I want a team ready for a covert strike on those colonies. We'll disable their mining operations and create the diversion we need. The Resolute will provide cover. Clark nodded immediately. Understood, Captain. We'll be ready. Shaw felt a flicker of relief, but the weight of their next move was not lost on her. The Overlords would not take this lying down. If they failed to cripple Xeris, humanity's window of opportunity would close, and the Overlord's retaliation would be swift and brutal. Get the crew ready, Shaw said, her voice hardening. We launch in 4 hours. 4 hours later, the Resolute was once again on the move, its engines humming as it slipped from its hidden sector and began its journey toward Xeris. The crew was tense but focused, knowing what was at stake. The mission ahead would be dangerous, perhaps even suicidal, but Shaw had no other choice. Humanity needed to make its stand now, or risk losing everything. We're entering the Xeris system, Clark announced from the navigation console, his voice sharp. The Overlord's fleet is still assembling at the main planet, but the mining colonies are on the moons. We'll need to hit them fast before the Overlords can react. Deploy the strike team, Shaw ordered. Clark, you'll lead the mission. Jansen, you're in charge of coordinating the Resolute's fire support. Keep us out of sight until the team is on the ground. The tension was palpable as the strike team prepared for deployment. Shaw watched the team members, elite soldiers who had fought through hell alongside her, checking their gear, adjusting their weapons, and making sure every detail was accounted for. They were ready, but Shaw knew the risk. If they were caught, the Resolute would be exposed. If they were too slow, the Overlords would regroup and retaliate with everything they had. The shuttle bay doors opened with a soft hiss, and Clark's team boarded the dropship. Shaw's gaze lingered on Clark for a moment, his confident stride betraying none of the fear or uncertainty that Shaw herself felt. He was the right man for the job, but even he couldn't guarantee success. Remember, Shaw said, her voice steady despite the chaos in her mind, we're not just disrupting their operations, we're giving the galaxy hope. This strike needs to be a victory. For all of us. Clark gave a sharp nod as he adjusted his helmet. Understood, Captain. As the shuttle launched from the Resolute and descended toward the moons of Xeris, Shaw turned back to the bridge. The crew was working in unison, coordinating their efforts as they prepared to launch the attack on the Overlord's fleet. Everyone ready? Shaw asked, her eyes cold with resolve. We're ready, Captain, Jansen replied. Shaw took one last look at the star-filled void outside the viewport. This was the moment. They were gambling everything on this strike, everything they had worked for. Humanity's fate, the fate of the rebellion, and the fate of the galaxy itself now rested on this mission. Make it count, Shaw said quietly, more to herself than anyone else. The dropship shook violently as it pierced the atmosphere of Xeris's moon. The whine of the engines barely drowned out the pounding of Shaw's heart. Clark and his team were already on the ground, infiltrating the mining colony. Shaw's mind raced, but there was no room for doubt. The operation had to succeed, or everything they had fought for would crumble. If the Overlords regained control of Xeris, the Federation's position would be indefensible. Approaching landing zone, Clark's voice crackled over the comms, steady but tense. Team is ready to deploy. We'll hit them hard and fast, Captain. Keep your timing precise, Shaw replied. We can't afford delays. The Overlords will be on high alert now. Clark's sharp breath came through the comms. Understood, Captain. We're going in now. Shaw turned to the crew around her. The bridge of the Resolute was alive with activity. The crew was tracking every move, every piece of information, monitoring the strike team's progress as they approached their target. Jansen worked furiously, coordinating the ship's fire support. Captain, Jansen called, his voice tight. We've got an incoming Overlord fleet, but they're not heading toward us. They're heading straight for Xeris. Shaw felt a cold chill settle over her. The Overlords were going to fight back with everything they had. They had to disrupt the fleet before it was too late. We can't let them reach the planet, Shaw said, her voice hard with resolve. Prepare to engage. If we don't stop them now, the Federation is finished. Clark, we're launching the attack, Jansen continued, speaking directly into the comms. You've got to hurry. We can't hold them off for long. Roger that, Clark replied. His voice was calm, but Shaw could hear the undercurrent of urgency. The Resolute powered up its weapons, the bridge humming with the sound of laser turrets locking into position. Shaw's eyes remained fixed on the star-filled screen as she guided the ship closer to Xeris. Every second counted now. They couldn't afford to hesitate. Suddenly, the entire ship shuddered as a massive shockwave passed through the hull. A secondary explosion rattled the ship, and red lights flashed across the bridge. Shields down to 30%, Jansen reported immediately. The Overlord fleet must have fired some kind of pulse weapon. Our shields are temporarily scrambled. Hold it together, Shaw barked. Evasive maneuvers now. We can't give them a clear shot. The Resolute twisted in space, evading the deadly blasts that followed in the wake of the pulse weapon. Shaw's fingers flew across the command console, guiding the ship through a complex series of evasive maneuvers. Every moment felt like an eternity. If they couldn't shake the Overlords off, they wouldn't have a chance to support Clark's team on the ground. Clark, where are you? Shaw asked, her voice tight with anxiety. We're in position, Clark answered. Deploying charges now. Shaw exhaled slowly as she heard the hum of explosives being set in place. The team had made it to the heart of the mining colony. Now they were setting the charges that would cripple the Overlord's resource supply lines. A successful strike would leave the Overlords vulnerable and scrambling for the resources they needed to continue their war. But just as Shaw allowed herself a moment of cautious relief, a bright flash of light exploded across the communication screen. Captain, Jansen's voice was filled with urgency. The Overlord fleet is opening fire on the moon. They're trying to stop the strike. Shaw's heart lurched. The Overlords were retaliating hard. If they hit the moon with a direct strike, Clark's team wouldn't make it out. They had to act, and fast. Jansen, increase firepower to full, Shaw ordered. Take out their command ship. We need to give Clark more time. The Resolute opened fire with everything it had. Beams of energy shot out toward the massive Overlord command ship at the center of the enemy formation. The sheer firepower shook the ship, but Shaw's determination burned brighter. If they could take down that ship, the rest of the fleet would fall into disarray. The battle outside was a symphony of explosions, light, and sound, but Shaw kept her focus. Inside the mining colony on Xeris, Clark's team was running out of time. She couldn't lose them. Clark, status report, Shaw said. We're in position, Clark replied. Setting final charges, and boom. There was a moment of silence before Clark spoke again, his voice tinged with satisfaction. The colony's reactors are destabilized. The Overlords won't be able to repair them in time. Shaw allowed herself a breath of relief. Get out of there, now. The next few moments were a blur of blaring alarms and the hum of energy blasts. Clark's team fought their way back to the extraction point, each second feeling like an eternity. Finally, after what felt like a lifetime, the signal came through. Extraction complete, Clark said, his voice tense but triumphant. We're on our way back. Shaw's heart raced as the Resolute provided cover fire for their retreat. The Overlord's fleet was now in chaos, their attack on the moon failing as their resources began to dwindle. Clark and his team had done the impossible. They had crippled the mining colony, cutting off a significant portion of the Overlord's supply lines. But the battle wasn't over. Shaw knew that the Overlords would retaliate with even greater force. We've bought ourselves some time, Shaw said, her voice low and determined. But the war is far from over. This is just the beginning. As the Resolute pulled away from Xeris, the damaged Overlord fleet in pursuit, Shaw looked out at the stars beyond. For the first time in a long while, there was a flicker of hope in her heart. Humanity had just proven that they could stand toe-to-toe with the Overlords, but there would be no peace until the final blow was struck. Shaw turned back to her crew. Resolute, prepare for the next phase. We fight until the end.